Unitarian Universalist Church, building community, inspiring growth, creating change. Here in the heart of Kansas City, we come together to create this hour of shared reflection so that we might be renewed in courage for these times and inspired to lives of greater dignity, higher purpose, deeper generosity, and more effective action. If you are new to Unitarian Universalism or to our congregation, we want to get to know you and share a part of your journey. If this place is already your spiritual home, welcome once more. We need one another, and it is good to be together again. Through the gifts of technology, we also gather virtually to celebrate community and connections as we lean into the values of justice, compassion, and reason. Welcome to all those who are joining us in this way today. Together, we learn the love that has the power to overcome both loneliness in the heart and oppression in the world. Welcome to our service this morning. May the words and music and images that we offer today nourish our best selves, calling forth abundant wisdom and love.
Arise, O souls, arise.
Good morning. I'm Beth Andes, a member of All Souls. We are so glad to see you here today in spite of the Chiefs game, or joining us online, those of you trying to do two things at once. Now we have the pleasure of recognizing those who are visiting us for the first time. If we have any first-time visitors, would you please stand or raise your hands, because the ushers have a gift for you. Okay, keep them up until you get your gift. Excellent. Nice to see you all. All right. You are welcome here with all of the identities you hold and in your fullness as a person. We hope that you will bring your whole self to this time together. Fellow members, at the conclusion of the service, introduce yourself to the new faces among us, those wearing the handcrafted name tags. Extend your own personal welcome and begin a conversation that has the potential to last for decades.
Once again, good morning. So did you all enjoy your extra hour of sleep? They say it might be the last one. I guess we'll know next year. The poet Robert Frost loved the autumn season, and he mourned when it ended in these words. Out through the fields and the woods and over the walls I have wended. I have climbed the hills of view and looked at the world and descended. I have come by the highway home, and lo, it is ended. The leaves are all dead on the ground, save those that the oak is keeping, to ravel them one by one and let them go, scraping and creeping out over the crusted snow when the others are sleeping. And the dead leaves lie huddled and still, no longer blown hither and thither. The last lone aster is gone. The flowers of the witch hazel wither. The heart is still aching to seek, but the feet question, whither? Ah, when to the human heart was it ever less than a treason to go with the drift of things and yield with a grace to reason and bow and accept the end of a love or a season? We gather this morning to stand together in community as we face into many endings in the seasons, in our lives and our wanderings, and in the world. In this hour of reflection, may we find strength to yield with a grace to reason, and accept all that is true as the darkness comes earlier in the day, and even the morning is more chill, for the earth turns again. And we kindle once more the flame of this chalice, seeking the light and warmth of this, our community of shared faith. Let us rise and speak once more the words of our covenant promise to one another. Together we affirm, goodwill is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Please remain standing for our opening song.
Now the autumn shudders in the rose's root. Far and wide the ladders lean among the fruit. Now the rose clambers up the trellised frame. In the rose remembers dust from which it came. Brighter than a blossom on the rose's bough sits the wizened orange, bitter bearing now. Beauty never slumbers, all is in her name, but the rose remembers dust from which it came.
Our commitment to human fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. Therefore, we set aside this time in our gathering to share with one another the joys and concerns which are now shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. If you would prefer to share without being part of our YouTube on the internet, we will have a moment towards the end of our sharing when the cameras will be turned away, and you can do that. I'll let you know. Want to begin by placing a flower for the privilege and pleasure of sharing our platform today with my friend and colleague, Rabbi Doug Alpert. It is always good to have him with us. Welcome, Doug.
Jeff Lewis, member since 1986. On Monday, I attempted to go to a presentation at the downtown library, which was to have covered broadly the Israeli-Arab difficulties over an extended period of time. The two speakers were going to be from the college in Leavenworth. However, just as they were about to begin their presentation, 30 or 40 or more women stood up and started shouting that the presentation was going to be biased, and they continued, and the presentation was not able to take place. So the issue I have with this is that they did not wait to hear what the presentation said or brought to light or didn't bring to light and then make a comment or a question at the end of that time. Instead, they chose to prevent the speakers from speaking at all. And I really have a big problem with this. It's one thing to disagree with another point of view or another person, and that's perfectly fine. But to prevent others who came to hear the presentation from hearing that, I think was really the wrong thing to do.
Are there other joys or concerns to be shared?
My name is Jonda. I've been hanging around a while, and I have never come up here for this. My brother-in-law, Jeremy, was very ill, and he made a complete recovery. And my sisters and I and my niece got my mom moved in yesterday, Springfield, Missouri, an apartment that is 500 times better than her last one and half the cost because she got into low-income senior housing. So I'm really excited for my mom, Marquita.
Good morning. My name is Rita, and last night I had just had a wonderful experience. My sister and brother-in-law from Wisconsin were vacationing down in Arkansas and Branson area, so they came through Kansas City last night, and they stopped at my place, and we had a wonderful dinner together at my home, and I just felt really blessed to have them in my presence. Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else to be shared? Then I would like to invite Doug, please, to bless us with the prayer for healing that is part of the Sabbath service as I have experienced it with your congregation.
Let me grab the phone real quick.
Yeah, we'll do that after. Hang on a second. There you go.
Hello, everybody. How are you this morning? So yesterday, I had ended up down on the country
Before I offer a blessing of healing, a couple of things in response to what's just been said. And first and foremost, it is always an honor, and I'm always grateful to have the opportunity to not be here, because Cole and me, we're here a lot. I'm surprised you aren't sick of us by now. But to be here for an All Souls service and to have the opportunity to, for the last 11 plus years, to be a part of the All Souls community. So I and we at Colomie are grateful for that, and I am personally grateful to stand with my colleague and friend, Reverend Dr. Kendyl Gibbons, whose spiritual leadership and influence and inspiration don't just stop at the walls of All Souls, but extend well beyond into the community, and I am grateful for that. And it feels like a time when I also need to make some comment regarding the conflict Palestinian-Israeli conflict, and that would be part of a blessing of healing. It is a time of heartache for me and my people personally, a time of confusion, a time of emotional strife. So for Palestinians, for Israelis, for Muslims, for Jews, Christians, all who are impacted by the present violence going on, this blessing of healing includes them as well. So, Mishaberach Avotenu v'Imotenu Abraham Yitzhak v'Yaakov Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah hu yavarich et kol hacholim. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, bless and heal those who are ill, all those who are ill. May the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, be filled with compassion for their health, to be restored and their strength to be revived. May God swiftly send them a complete renewal of body and spirit, as we say, Rufuah Shlema, Rufat HaNefesh, Rufat HaGuf, a complete healing, a healing of both spirit and body, recognizing for all of us there may come a time when physical healing is no longer attainable, but healing of the spirit is always available. That they be renewed for full healing, and let us all say together, Amen.
And now I'll ask our tech folks to turn aside the cameras for a moment and invite anyone who would like to share. Which will appear on the screen. We are here to abet creation and bear witness to it, to notice one another's beautiful faces and complex natures, so that creation need not play to an empty house. And now the children among us will be released to their classes, and they will exit with song.
Go now in peace, may love guide all your ways. Beauty be the blessing of your nights and days. Truth on your lips and kindness in your deeds. Faith to follow where the human spirit leads.
My name is Morris Metter, and I'm on the Board of Trustees of All Souls. One thing that I value so much about All Souls is our freedom and even encouragement to have open discussions about all issues, including social issues and even theology and thinking about our own faith path. We have no creed. This is a far distance from the church I grew up in, which was a Southern Baptist church. I remember several years ago, I was looking at a bulletin board in the hall going to Conover, and there was a posted advertisement there for the forum from the 1930s, and a gentleman came up behind me and was telling me, he says, in the 30s, this was a forum that was rare in Kansas City. There was no TV, of course, at that time, or internet, and large groups of people would come to the forum and could just discuss the issues. And this tradition continues today. The forum is still going after all these years. And now, if you look on the back of my car out in the parking lot, you will see a bumper sticker, And it reads, Unitarian Universalism, where all your answers are questioned. I love that sticker. I love that sticker, and I love that position. It is so valuable today when so many people question the value of religion, and so many religious institutions are going away, and we struggle with that. So, as we take this offering now, please be generous. And remember that All Souls has existed for 150 years or more because we all have supported our church so well. Now we'll dedicate our offering. we dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create change towards a just and compassionate society.
From A Defense of Abortion by Judith Jarvis Thompson. Most opposition to abortion relies on the premise that the fetus is a human being, a person from the moment of conception. The premise is argued for, but as I think, not always well. Take, for example, the most common argument. We are asked to notice that the development of a human being from conception through birth into childhood is continuous. Then it is said that to draw a line, to choose a point in this development and say, before this point, the thing is not a person, after this point, it is a person, is to make an arbitrary choice. A choice for which, in the nature of things, no good reason can be given. It is concluded that the fetus is, or anyway, that we had better say it is, a person from the moment of conception. But this conclusion does not follow. Similar things might be said about the development of an acorn into an oak tree. And it does not follow that acorns are oak trees, or that we had better say they are. Arguments of this form are sometimes called slippery slope arguments. The phrase is perhaps self-explanatory. And it is dismaying that opponents of abortion rely on them so heavily and uncritically. I am inclined to agree, however, that the prospects for drawing a line in the development of the fetus look dim. I am inclined to think also that we shall probably have to agree that the fetus has already become a human person well before birth. It seems to me to be of great interest to ask what happens if, for the sake of argument, we allow the premise. How precisely are we supposed to get from there to the conclusion that abortion is morally impermissible? Opponents of abortion commonly spend most of their time establishing that the fetus is a person, and hardly any time explaining the step from there to the impermissibility of abortion. Perhaps they think the step too simple and obvious to require much comment. Many of those who defend abortion rely on the premise that the fetus is not a person, but only a bit of tissue that will become a person at birth. Whatever the explanation, I suggest that the step they take is neither easy nor obvious, that it calls for closer examination than it is commonly given, and that when we do give it this closer examination, we shall perhaps feel inclined to reject it. I propose then that we grant that the fetus is a person from the moment of conception. How does the argument go from here? Something like this, I take it. Every person has a right to life, so the fetus has a right to life. No doubt the mother has a right to decide what shall happen in and to her body. Everyone would grant that. But surely a person's right to life is stronger and more stringent than the mother's right to decide what happens in and to her body, and so outweighs it. So the fetus may not be killed, and abortion may not be performed. It sounds plausible. But now let me ask you to imagine this. You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. The director of the hospital now tells you, look, we're sorry the Society of Music Lovers did this to you. We would never have permitted it if we had known, but still they did it, and the violinist is now plugged into you. To unplug you would be to kill him. But never mind, it's only for 9 months. By then, he will have recovered from his ailment and can safely be unplugged from you. Is it morally incumbent on you to accede to this situation? No doubt it would be very nice of you if you did, a great kindness. But do you have to accede to it? What if it were not 9 months, but 9 years? Or longer still? What if the director of the hospital says, tough luck, I agree, but now you've got to stay in bed with a violinist plugged into you for the rest of your life? Because remember this, all persons have a right to life, and violinists are persons. Granted, you have a right to decide what happens in and to your body, but a person's right to life outweighs your right to decide what happens in and to your body. So you cannot ever be unplugged from him. I imagine you would regard this as outrageous, which suggests that something really is wrong with that plausible-sounding argument I mentioned a moment ago. In this case, of course, you were kidnapped. You didn't volunteer for the operation that plugged the violinist into your kidneys. Can those who oppose abortion on the ground I mentioned make an exception for a pregnancy due to rape? Certainly. They can say that persons have a right to life only if they didn't come into existence because of rape. Or they can say that all persons have a right to life, but that some have less of a right to life than others. In particular, that those who came into existence because of rape have less. But these statements have a rather unpleasant sound. Surely the question of whether you have a right to life at all, or how much of it you have, shouldn't turn on the question of whether or not you are a product of a rape. And in fact, the people who oppose abortion on the ground I mentioned do not make this distinction, and hence do not make an exception in the case of rape. Nor do they make an exception for a case in which the mother has to spend the 9 months of her pregnancy in bed. They would agree that would be a great pity and hard on the mother, but all the same, all persons have a right to life, the fetus is a person, and so on. I suspect, in fact, that they would not make an exception even for a case in which, miraculously enough, the pregnancy went on for 9 years, or even the rest of the mother's life.
Again, good morning, everybody. And again, my appreciation for welcoming me into your spiritual space this morning. To give some Jewish perspective on abortion, can't say that I'll claim to have as well thought out an analogous situation, and certainly won't be as well delivered. But interesting nonetheless, at least to kind of the lawyer side of me as well as the rabbinic side. And I come here wearing a couple of hats, one as the proud board member of Planned Parenthood Great Plains, where I chair their community outreach, their 501c4, and as one of the 14 clergy plaintiffs on the lawsuit suing the state of Missouri on their abortion ban. Thank you. Thank you. Fingers crossed. It'll all turn out okay. So, and finally, a Chiefs reference, since that seems to be the popular thread this morning. Chiefs owe you all a thank you note for dragging me in here, because since I am not watching the game, I am convinced that's the reason they're winning. I think there is a direct correlation. So, that said, a backdrop to a discussion of how Judaism looks at abortion and a couple of really prefatory ideas. The first of which being is that I am not advocating that everyone follow Jewish law, referred to in the Hebrew as halakha, which literally means the way to go. I'm always happy to assert my Jewish perspective in a discussion, any discussion that involves comparative religion and theology. If you know us, you know we as Jews, we love to argue. Machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven. It's really how we breathe. However, the whole point of our lawsuit against the state is that the powers that be have asserted their singular religious perspective, violating the Establishment Clause of the Missouri Constitution. And although there's a fairly widespread agreement within the Jewish community on the most important issues regarding the right to an abortion, we can even find some divergence within our own community. My second comment is in reference to the highest of Jewish ideals, referred to in the Hebrew as pikuach nefesh. Pikuach nefesh, or sanctity of human life, overrides virtually all other observances, observance of the Sabbath, and pretty much every other religious observance. In the context of a debate regarding abortion, the question really boils down to whose life is sanctified. In the Jewish world, it really does come down to whether you prioritize the ongoing viability of a fetus or the person carrying the fetus. While there are those who, from a religious perspective, read here not from a scientific perspective, that assert that a fetus is a living being, and I disagree, and as I tell my folks in regard to science, we are not required as Jews to check our brains at the door. I don't think there's any debate over whether those carrying a fetus are fully formed living human beings. Keeping that in mind, here it is, a short history of Jewish thought regarding abortion. And a note here with an apology, while I'm endeavoring to make references to those carrying a pregnancy as simply those carrying a pregnancy and not limiting it to women, it is pervasive, at least in our ancient Jewish text, right up almost to the present, that it's gender specific. And I do recognize that it's not only women who can become pregnant. So while we always strive to find support for any tenet of Jewish law in our written Torah, the 5 books of Moses, in this case we look to an excerpt from Exodus chapter 21. It discusses the ramification of 2 men fighting. And if a woman as a bystander is injured or killed, the punishment takes the form of a criminal penalty, also known as lex talionis, an eye for an eye. So as an aside here, we have no knowledge that the idea of an eye for an eye was ever taken literally. Rather, there was a financial determination of the value of the injured limb. In other words, this is where you get tort law or personal injury law. So the next time you see one of those commercials by the attorneys on TV, you can blame us. What is pertinent in regard to our discussion is that if during the fight between the 2 men, a pregnant woman is struck, but she's not injured, but she miscarries, the punishment incurred is only a fine, valuing the fetus as if it were damaged or lost property, or the death of the pregnant woman is a capital offense. In other words, the fetus is not considered a person. Later, in the rabbinic period, in an early text on Jewish law known as the Mishnah, redacted in the year 200 of the Common Era, it states that if the fetus is threatening the life of the one carrying that fetus, one could take the fetus out limb by limb if necessary to save the life of the pregnant person. However, if the baby has crowned or the greater part of the child has already come forth, the child must not be touched because one fully formed life may not be taken to save another. In other words, again, the life of the mother must take precedent over the fetus right up until the baby crowns. Again, the fetus is not considered a person. So just to get a little deeper into the Jewish weeds, as we are apt to do, nothing that we cannot make more complicated, there is a debate as to the best way to evaluate the necessity of an abortion. Shlomo Yitzhaki, better known as Rashi, the French rabbi who lived primarily in the 11th century of the Common Era, and the leading commentator in both our biblical text and our Talmud, begins with the basic premise that, until emerged, the fetus is not a child, not an independent person. And while it does not imply that, according to Rashi, there is blanket permission to destroy a fetus, but it does provide wider latitude in allowing abortions for therapeutic reasons to safeguard the mother. On the other side of the debate is Moses ben Maimon, better known as Maimonides or the Rambam, a Spanish rabbi who lived primarily in the 12th century. Maimonides asserted that we should only permit abortion only when there is a clear danger to the life of the mother, that the fetus was seen as what we refer to in the Hebrew as a rodef, one who is pursuing the life of the mother, a potential murderer. So to get to kind of the highlight here, Rashi tends to win this argument. So while in Judaism there seems to be some requirement for at least some reason to justify an abortion, that said, over time, I think the reasons have only broadened. 18th century Rabbi Jacob Emden stated that there is room beyond potential death of the mother to allow an abortion, what he describes as great need. This might include great pain suffered by the pregnant person. Later, rabbinic authorities provide reasons including detriment to the mother's health, circumstances in which there was shame in bringing the fetus to term, fear of disfigurement, and later on, the future well-being of the fetus becoming a fully formed human being. In the Jewish world, the big fear has been Tay-Sachs, a disease regulating a child to a very short life, a life of extreme suffering. And of course, this is a result of advances in medical technology in which amniocentesis is an accurate predictor of such a fate. Ultimately, in the Jewish world, particularly more traditional parts of the Jewish world, it depends on a particular rabbi and the particular circumstances of a case. And of course, this raises the question of who the hell am I to make any decision in lieu of a woman deciding for herself in consultation with her physician? Further, contrary to assertions that abortion is some sort of ticket toward promiscuous sex, one should always assume, and it is totally accurate and valid to assume, that decisions regarding abortions are never made lightly. As to how this rabbi sees their role or my role in all of this, well, the authority of the rabbi who sits on my end of the Jewish spectrum is anything but authoritarian. Be so nice if they would listen to me on a regular basis. What I can do is I can seek to provide counseling with all compassion and respect for those who come to me. The further truth being that not everyone will even come to me for advice and counseling. My own sense of what justifies abortion is any and all hardship faced by the pregnant person as they see it. Physical health issues, mental health issues, economic hardship, perceived serious doubt and ability to parent. So to summarize through this maze of Jewish history, abortion in Jewish law is allowed in the first 40 days for any reason or no reason at all. Now, 40 days doesn't do you a whole lot of good, but it does establish that under Jewish law, life does not begin at conception. After that, the welfare of the pregnant person always takes priority over the fetus until the fetus is no longer a fetus. And it would be great if those who are so staunchly anti-choice would advocate for the lives of children once they have indeed become children. That they have food to eat, decent housing, a good education, and parents who don't have to work 3 jobs and have the time to be in their kids' lives. So with that, I pray, and may we always advocate with compassion and passion for the welfare of all those who are indeed fully persons. And as we say in our tradition, Cain Yehi Ratzon, may that be God's will. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Part of the problem with discussing abortion is that babies are cute, at least when they are well-fed, relatively clean, and not blown up by artillery fire in a war zone. The inherent adorableness of helpless infants is an evolutionary technique to get functional human adults to protect them and take care of them, and thus to be uncomfortable with the idea of destroying them before they are born. Back when I had occasion to study the philosophy of ethics, we were familiarized with some of the ways in which logical philosophical arguments can be made to justify ethically repugnant actions, and we were encouraged to pay attention to our feelings about the implications of what certain principles might lead to. Considered moral judgments, we called these intuitive senses of approval or revulsion, any moral system which supported the conclusion that it was acceptable to push her aged grandmother down the stairs was likely to be in some way ill-formed. The same aesthetic case can be made against abortion. It is ugly while babies are appealing, so how can one countenance the act which eliminates them? I should perhaps be clear that at the time of this class in my intellectual life, I was a newly married college sophomore, intently preparing for seminary, in no position economically, emotionally, or culturally to start parenting a child, and having come of age in a post-Roe versus Wade society, had I found myself pregnant, I would have felt a profound sense of personal failure for allowing that to happen, as well as an obligation to myself and to everyone else concerned with and invested in my future to end the pregnancy. I imagine that having done so would have become a source of lifelong regret as things turned out, but it was, thankfully, never a decision that I was called upon to make. And when I say I, of course, I mean we, and yet at the same time, I do not mean to diminish the personal quality of responsibility that I would have taken for that decision. Nevertheless, in spite of recognizing that potential for regret, I would not have considered at the time that such a decision was the province of any legislative body. I would have taken whatever steps were necessary to have frustrated any legal prohibitions seeking to govern my choice. Neither, as you might imagine, would I today recognize such a governmental intrusion into my choice or any other woman's in this kind of matter as either legitimate or definitive. The question before us this morning has to do with how my position regarding abortion, and perhaps yours, might be matters of faith and thus fall under the category of freedom of religion. It is not hard to see how this comes about for people who argue that their God forbids them to commit murder of other human beings, presumably, and since an unborn fetus is a human being, according to them, created by God, they are forbidden, as they claim we all ought to be forbidden, to remove it from the womb in which it is developing if that will cause its death. The issue here is not such a believer's freedom to conduct their own lives according to these convictions, but rather whether they shall be permitted to impose their strictures upon others who do not share their beliefs. For this purpose, I think it becomes relevant to consider what religious beliefs would have been guiding my thinking in the days when abortion might have become an urgent question in my own life, or indeed now when I might be called upon to offer advice or assistance to those confronted with the dilemma of an unplanned, unwanted, or high-risk pregnancy in today's shifting political and legal climate. I submit that I would be informed by 4 categories of thought basic to our faith as I have always understood it. First, nature; second, reason; and third, responsibility. The fourth is perhaps a more contemporary principle, which I will call resistance. A word of explanation about each of these. The lessons of science and the natural world have always been central for Unitarians. What I know from this realm is that completing a given pregnancy is not always nature's priority. In fact, biologists estimate that 60% of human conceptions fail before the person is even aware that they are pregnant. We know that pregnancy and birth are costly to mother creatures in calories and nutritional resources, in strength and physical effort and risk. And at times, when those resources are not readily available in the environment, some animals have the capacity for either fetal diapause, in which the development of the fetus is halted and can be resumed in more favorable circumstances, or fetal reabsorption, in which the potential offspring stops developing and is reabsorbed into the mother's system, which increases the likelihood that she will survive to breed again successfully another time. As far as we know, these are not conscious decisions on the part of potential mothers, but responses to an environmental stress conditions, the availability of protein sources, the threat of predators, and other factors that can make survival of mother or offspring less likely. The same sort of thing happens in troops of Galata monkeys. When a new dominant male takes over, the majority of females who are pregnant with fetuses that cannot possibly be the children of the new alpha male will spontaneously abort those pregnancies, the resulting babies of which would be killed by the new leader, to bring the females more quickly back into reproductive cycle so that they might sooner become pregnant with his offspring. Nature is so profligate with pregnancy, it seems to me that human intention has a legitimate role, as well as environmental factors, in determining whether or not a particular conception will proceed to birth. It is here that reason as a religious value enters the equation. It would have been irrational to think that I could have afforded to support a baby, and be equally unreasonable to set aside the academic path that I was on in pursuit of an independent career and vocation. Babies are cute, but is not necessarily sensible to undertake caring for one, as opposed to whatever project you might otherwise have been working on. Most of my mentors and supporters would have considered it self-indulgent for me to have done that at that time in my life, and I would have been afraid that I would end up resenting the child who, through no fault of their own, had derailed my education and my calling. Nor had I any reason to think I would be a particularly good parent, which I do think is a sensible question for anyone to ask when they are deciding whether to complete a pregnancy. Moreover, one of the social moral fears that had been taught to me was the consequences of overpopulation, so that it seemed to me unreasonable to add to the planet's burden any additional children who were not intelligently planned and unambiguously desired. Certain species of cats and rabbits probably do not hold rational debates within themselves before reabsorbing their pregnancies, but we humans can and must take account of what the costs of giving birth will be and the reasonable likelihood of success for the members of that next generation. These considerations of reason connect to another religious value that I was taught attached in some way to almost every other value we had, and that was responsibility. With freedom came responsibility. Every right had its corresponding responsibility. Even the language of the 7 principles specified a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. All the sexuality education I experienced dealt in the currency of responsibility, not making implicit or explicit commitments that would irresponsibly cause hurt to another person, not being irresponsible with one's own or another person's health, and the most glaring example of all, the ultimate failure of responsibility, not becoming pregnant with a child for whom you had no capacity to take responsibility. Abortion was a deeply sad and regrettable and probably painful form of retroactive responsibility if one were careless enough in the throes of young love to fall pregnant. Let's return for a moment to the notion of considered moral judgments. I have some sympathy with Judith Jarvis Thompson's observation that there is something unsavory in the proposition that one human being has less of a right to life than another by virtue of the circumstances of their conception, whether by rape or otherwise. At the same time, I am just as certain as I am that something must be wrong with any moral system that suggests it is acceptable to push your grandmother down the stairs, as I am certain that there is a defect in any moral logic that claims it is right to force a traumatized 12-year-old to carry and give birth to a rapist's child at the risk of her immediate health and possible future reproductive prospects, as well as the emotional trauma of permanent separation from her child. If anything is immoral, that surely is, particularly when a remedy is, as we know, available. Which brings us to what I would call the religious value of resistance. Our tradition has a long history of standing against forces of oppression and inequity. It was founded in the work of a Polish princess who became the mother of the only Unitarian king in history and who issued the first edict of religious toleration in Europe during the 16th century. The Universalist denomination ordained the first woman clergy in the United States in 1863 and supported the efforts of many of its members to advocate for equal suffrage for women. We have always advocated for women as independent moral agents, competent to make the consequential decisions determining our own lives. The impulse to prevent women from exercising control over our own reproductive functions is emblematic of a cultural tendency to impose duties upon women for the convenience of the powers that be. This tendency is visible again today in the rising movement of the community of involuntary celibate men who advocate that women ought not to be allowed to withhold sex from men who desire it. Enforced birth is a line in the sand that I believe power must not be allowed to cross, lest we lose all that has been gained by and for women over 1,000 years. Women have always shared with each other our inherited wisdoms of how to maintain our choices, even when choosing has been forbidden to us. Still, we have shared in whispers over the soup pots or the quilting frames, in scribbled recipes, in songs and stories bequeathed from our foremothers. Knowledge is resistance, so is any hard-won freedom. But it is only as we choose among the options that are accessible to us that our moral nature and our actual humanity are formed. Let's stand and sing together.
In sweet fields of autumn, the gold grain is falling, the white clouds drift lonely, the wild swan is calling. Alas for the daisies, the tall fern and grasses, wind, sweep, and rainfall fill lowlands and passes. The snows of December shall fill windy hollow, the bleak rain trails after, and March wind shall follow. The deer through the valleys leave print of their going, and diamonds of sleet mark the ridges of snowing. The stillness of death shall stoop over the water, the plover sweep low where the pale streamlets falter. But deep in the earth plot the black seed it's living, when spring sounds her bugles for rousing and giving.
We release this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. These we release into the world and carry in our minds and hearts until we are together again. We end with the words of Robert Frost, who says of fall, "The same leaves over and over again. They fall from giving shade above to make one texture of faded brown and fit the earth like a leather glove. Before the leaves can mount again to fill the trees with another shade, they must go down past things coming up. They must go down into the dark decayed. They must be pierced by flowers and put beneath the feet of the dancing flowers. However it is in some other world, I know that this is the way in ours."